They said an Omega was born to kneel, but they never looked close enough to see the fire in my eyes. Alpha Kaelen didn't just reject me, he tried to erase me. He wanted his perfect, high-born bride, Seraphina, to shine. So he threw me into the shadows to scrub the floors of the very hall where they would wed. But when the sacred moment came, when the goddess refused to light the luna's torch for his chosen bride, Kaelen made the biggest mistake of his life. He ordered me to light it for her. He thought I was nothing. He didn't know that when I touched that torch, the flames wouldn't just burn. They would bow. The Blackwood estate was always coldest in November, but for Elara, the chill came from the inside of the mansion, not the snow-covered peaks of the Rockies outside. Mr. Spot, Omega. The voice was like velvet wrapped around a jagged rock. Elara didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on the marble tiles of the grand hall, her hands raw and red from the chemical cleaner. She scrubbed harder, the bristled brush making a rhythmic scritch-scratch sound that echoed in the cavernous room. "I'm speaking to you, Elara." She paused, taking a slow breath before looking up. Standing above her was Seraphina, draped in a white cashmere coat that cost more than Elara's entire life earnings. Beside her stood Alpha Kaelen. Kaelen, the man who, 3 years ago, had looked Elara in the eye during the Blood Moon Festival and felt the pull of the bond. The man who had whispered promises in the dark, only to shatter them in the light of day when he realized Elara was an orphan with no political connections. He had rejected the bond publicly, demoting her from a pack member to a serving Omega. "I apologize, Miss Seraphina," Elara said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I will clean it immediately." Kaelen shifted his weight, his leather boots creaking. He looked uncomfortable, but his jaw was set in that stubborn line Elara used to adore. Now, she just despised it. "Make sure the floors are reflective, Elara," Kaelen said, his tone clipped. "The Northern Alliance arrives tonight. The ceremony is tomorrow. Everything must be perfect for the lighting." The lighting, the ancient tradition of the Blackwood Pack. The new Luna had to light the ceremonial torch at the altar. Legend said that if the moon goddess accepted the union, the fire would turn a brilliant, smokeless silver. If not, the torch would simply smoke and die. "It will be ready, Alpha," Elara replied, looking back down at the bucket of grey water. Seraphina let out a cruel, tinkling laugh. She stepped forward and, with a deliberate motion, kicked the bucket. Grey, soapy sludge spilled everywhere, over the freshly polished marble, soaking into the knees of Elara's worn jeans. "Oops," Seraphina smirked, clutching Kaelen's arm. "Look at how clumsy I am. I'm just so nervous about the ceremony, Kaelen. What if the fire doesn't light?" Kaelen pulled Seraphina close, kissing her forehead, ignoring Elara, who was now kneeling in a puddle of filth. "Don't be ridiculous, Sarah. You are the daughter of the Iron Tooth Alpha. Your bloodline is impeccable. The goddess will be honored to have you as the Luna of Blackwood." He looked down at Elara with cold indifference. "Clean this up, and then go to the woodshed. We need the ceremonial kindling brought in. Dry birch only." "But it's a blizzard outside," Elara whispered, finally breaking her composure. "The woodshed is 1/2 a mile out." Kaelen's eyes flashed gold, his wolf rising to the surface, demanding submission. "Did I ask about the weather? You are an Omega. You exist to serve this pack. If you want to eat tonight, you will get the wood." Elara gritted her teeth, the humiliation burning hotter than any fire. She nodded once. "Yes, Alpha." As they walked away, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings, Elara grabbed the rag. She didn't cry. She had run out of tears the night Kaelen announced his engagement. She wiped the floor, her movements sharp and angry. She didn't know it yet, but the goddess was watching, and the goddess didn't care about bloodlines or impeccable coats. She cared about the truth. By the time Elara returned from the woodshed, her fingers were blue. She dragged the sled of white birch logs through the heavy service doors of the kitchen, shivering so violently her teeth chattered. The kitchen was a war zone. Chefs were screaming orders, preparing the feast for the visiting alphas. "Elara, you're late!" Marcus, the head cook, barked. He was a large man, usually kind, but the stress of the event had everyone on edge. "Leave the wood by the hearth in the great hall, then get changed. You're serving wine tonight." "Serving." Elara blinked, wiping melting snow from her eyelashes. "But Kaelen, Alpha Kaelen said I was to stay out of sight once the guests arrived." "Plans changed," Marcus grunted, chopping carrots with terrifying speed. Two of the serving girls shifted early due to the full moon proximity. They're locked in the den. "I need bodies on the floor. Wear the formal uniform and keep your head down." Elara's stomach twisted. Serving meant walking among the elite. It meant watching Kaelen parade Seraphina around. It meant being invisible in plain sight. 20 minutes later, dressed in the stiff black dress and white apron of the service staff, Elara entered the great hall. The room had transformed. What was a cold cavern earlier was now a warm, golden sanctuary. Chandeliers dripped with crystals, and the scent of roasted pine and expensive cologne filled the air. The Northern Alliance had arrived. Men in sharp suits and women in silk gowns stood in clusters, holding crystal flutes. These were the most powerful wolves in the country. Elara moved through the crowd with a tray of champagne, making herself small. She perfected the art of blending into the wallpaper. "The Blackwood Pack has certainly recovered well financially," a deep voice rumbled near her. Elara paused, offering a glass to a tall, imposing man with dark skin and eyes like polished obsidian. This was Alpha Dominic of the Shadow River Pack. He was known as a ruthless tactician, a man who had never taken a mate. "Thank you," Dominic said, taking a glass. His fingers brushed hers. He paused, his head tilting slightly as he inhaled. Elara froze. She knew she smelled like cleaning chemicals and wet dog, hardly the scent of a lady. She pulled her hand back quickly. "Oh, enjoy your evening, Alpha." Dominic didn't look away. His gaze was intense, piercing through her facade. "You have ash on your cheek, miss." Elara flushed, her hand flying to her face. I apologize. I was moving the firewood." "The Alpha of this house has his staff moving firewood in a storm?" Dominic asked, his voice low but carrying a dangerous edge. He looked across the room to where Kaelen was laughing loudly with Seraphina's father. Interesting management style. Before Elara could reply, a high-pitched voice cut through the noise. "Waiter, bring that tray here. I'm parched." It was Seraphina. She was holding court in the center of the room, surrounded by a group of sycophantic women from neighboring packs. Elara kept her head down and approached. "Yes, Miss Seraphina." Seraphina's smile dropped when she recognized Elara. A flicker of malice lit up her eyes. This was her moment to show dominance in front of the other high-born ladies. "Oh, it's you," Seraphina sneered, loud enough for the nearby groups to hear. "I thought Kaelen banished you to the stables. I suppose they let anyone handle the drinks these days." She reached for a glass, but instead of taking it by the stem, she slapped Elara's hand. The tray tipped. 3 glasses of champagne shattered on the floor, splashing onto Seraphina's white satin shoes. The music stopped. The room went deadly silent. "You clumsy, jealous little wretch!" Seraphina shrieked, playing the victim perfectly. She pointed a manicured finger at Elara. "You did that on purpose. You're trying to ruin my rehearsal dinner because you can't stand that Kaelen chose me." Elara stood amidst the broken glass, her hands trembling. I didn't. You hit my hand." "Liar!" Seraphina raised her hand to strike Elara. Elara flinched, waiting for the blow, but it never came. A hand caught Seraphina's wrist in midair. Kaelen appeared, his face a mask of fury, but he wasn't looking at Seraphina's violence. He was looking at the stain on her shoes. "Enough!" Kaelen hissed at Seraphina, dropping her hand. Then he turned on Elara. The look in his eyes broke the last fragment of her heart. There was no pity there, only annoyance. "Get on your knees," Kaelen ordered, his alpha command rolling off him in waves, "and pick up the glass, with your bare hands." A gasp went through the crowd. This was barbaric, even for an Omega punishment. "Kaelen," Alpha Dominic's voice rang out from the back, calm but authoritative. "That is unnecessary." "Stay out of this, Dominic," Kaelen snapped, his ego flared. "She is my pack member. She disrespected the future Luna. Elara, do it. Now." Elara looked at Kaelen. She remembered the boy who had once brought her wildflowers. That boy was dead. Slowly she sank to her knees. She reached for a shard of crystal. It sliced into her thumb. A drop of blood, bright red, fell onto the white marble. As the blood hit the floor, the logs in the massive fireplace at the end of the hall suddenly roared. The fire flared up, turning a strange, vibrant violet for just a second before settling back to orange. No one noticed the fire. Everyone was watching the broken girl on the floor. "Clean it all," Kaelen spat, "and then get out of my sight. If you ruin the ceremony tomorrow, I will exile you to the Rogue Lands myself." Elara picked up the glass, slicing her palms, feeling the sting. But inside, something was shifting. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "You want me to disappear," she thought, looking at the blood on her hands. "I won't. I will watch you fail." The grand sanctuary of the Blackwood Pack was a cathedral of glass and ancient stone, built centuries ago over the very spot where the first Alpha claimed this territory. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass ceiling, painting the congregation in hues of crimson and gold, but the air inside was suffocatingly thick. Elara stood in the shadows of the rearmost pillar, her bandaged hands tucked deep into the pockets of her coarse grey servant's tunic. She wasn't supposed to be here. Kaelen had ordered her to stay in the kitchens, scrubbing pots until her fingers bled. But Elder Thorn, the pack's spiritual leader and the only person who still looked at Elara with kindness, had quietly insisted she attend. "The pack witnesses the rise of a Luna," Thorn had whispered to her earlier that morning, handing her a hooded cloak to hide her face. "Every wolf must be present, even the ones they try to forget. Destiny requires witnesses, Elara." Now she watched. The pews were filled with dignitaries. Alpha Dominic sat in the front row, his posture relaxed, but his eyes scanning the room with predatory alertness. He looked bored by the pageantry, checking his watch as if counting the seconds until he could leave. At the altar stood Kaelen. He looked like a king in his charcoal ceremonial suit, his shoulders broad, his hair slicked back. But Elara knew him too well. She saw the way his left hand twitched at his side, a nervous tic he had since childhood. He was terrified, not of marriage, but of failure. The Blackwood Pack's influence had waned in recent years. This alliance with Seraphina's wealthy family was the only thing keeping them from bankruptcy. The heavy oak doors groaned open. The organ music swelled, shaking the floorboards beneath Elara's worn boots. Seraphina entered. A collective gasp rippled through the room. She was undeniably beautiful, Her dress was a masterpiece of white lace and diamonds, hugging her curves and trailing behind her like a river of silk. Her father, the iron-tooth Alpha, walked her down the aisle with a chest puffed out in pride. As Seraphina passed Elara's hiding spot, the scent of expensive perfume was overpowering, masking the natural scent of the wolf beneath. Seraphina held her head high, smiling at the cameras that were live-streaming the event to the neighboring territories. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a coronation. When she reached the altar, Kaelen took her hand. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We gather today," Elder Thorn's voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the stone room, "to unite Alpha Kaelen and his chosen mate, Seraphina. But a wolf does not choose with the mind alone. The spirit must agree." Thorn turned to the massive stone basin behind the altar. It was filled with the white birch logs Elara had dragged through the snow the night before. They were arranged in a perfect pyramid. Beside the basin stood the Luna's torch, a golden staff, topped with an unlit oil wick. "The tradition of the flame," Thorn intoned. "Only a true Luna, accepted by the goddess and the land, can strike the torch against the flint of origins and ignite the sacred fire. If the flame burns silver, the pack will thrive. If it burns red, there will be war. If it does not light—" He let the sentence hang in the air. Everyone knew the end of that sentence. If it does not light, the union is cursed. "Seraphina," Thorn said, stepping back. "Take the torch." Seraphina released Kaelen's hand. She stepped up to the podium, her confidence radiating off her. She looked at the crowd, offering a practiced, demure smile before gripping the golden staff. Elara felt a sudden, sharp pain in her chest. It wasn't jealousy that had burned away long ago. It was a warning. Her wolf, usually dormant and beaten down by years of abuse, suddenly growled in the back of her mind. "Wait," her wolf whispered. Elara leaned forward, her breath catching in her throat. Seraphina raised the torch. "With this flame," she recited, her voice clear and arrogant, "I claim this pack. I claim this land. I claim this Alpha." She swung the torch down, striking the head against the ancient flint strip embedded in the altar. Clack! Sparks flew, bright orange sparks. They landed on the oil-soaked wick of the torch. But the torch didn't catch. The sparks fizzled and died instantly. A murmur ran through the crowd. "Just a cold striker," Seraphina laughed nervously. "It's barely been used in 20 years after all." She struck it again. Harder. Clack! More sparks. This time a small flame flickered on the wick, a weak, sputtering blue light. Seraphina sighed in relief and quickly lowered the torch to the pile of birch wood. "Burn," she commanded. The flame touched the birch. Instead of roaring to life, the wood hissed. A thick, acrid plume of black smoke billowed up from the basin, instantly snuffing out the weak flame on Seraphina's torch. The smoke rolled over the altar, smelling not like burning wood, but like rotting meat. Seraphina coughed, waving her hand in front of her face. "What is this?" she shrieked, backing away. The crowd stood up. Whispers turned into shouts. "The omen!" someone cried out. "The goddess rejects her!" Kaelen's face went pale. He stepped forward, grabbing Seraphina's arm. "Do it again! You didn't hold it long enough." "I did!" Seraphina cried, her perfect facade cracking. "The wood! It's wet! It's soaking wet!" She spun around, her eyes wild, scanning the room until they locked onto the back of the hall. She couldn't see Elara in the shadows, but she knew who to blame. "It's the sabotage!" Seraphina screamed, pointing a trembling finger towards the servants' entrance. "That Omega! The jealous trash! She brought wet wood from the storm to humiliate me." All eyes turned to Kaelen. The Northern Alliance members were murmuring, looking unimpressed. Alpha Dominic was leaning forward, a small, dark smile playing on his lips. Kaelen felt his power slipping. He couldn't let them think the goddess rejected his bride. He had to make this a human error, a sabotage. "Elara!" Kaelen roared, his voice shaking the stained glass. "Bring her forward. Now!" 2 guards near the back spotted Elara. They grabbed her by the arms, dragging her out of the shadows. Her hood fell back, revealing her messy hair and the bruise on her cheek from the previous day's labor. They threw her onto the aisle. She stumbled but didn't fall, walking with a strange, calm dignity toward the altar, where the black smoke was still curling into the air. Elara stopped at the base of the altar steps. She didn't bow. She looked up at Kaelen, seeing the sweat beading on his forehead. "You called, Alpha," she said softly. "You dare?" Kaelen hissed, stepping down to meet her. He was close enough that she could smell the fear on him. "You brought wet wood. You tried to ruin this ceremony." "The wood was dry, Kaelen," Elara said, using his name instead of his title. The crowd gasped at the insolence. "I checked every log myself. It is bone dry." "Liar!" Seraphina shrieked from the altar. She looked deranged, her white dress stained with soot. "Light it then. If it's dry, light it." Kaelen looked at Seraphina, then back at Elara. A cruel idea formed in his mind. If Elara couldn't light it, he could blame her incompetence and execute her for treason, saving his reputation. If she could light it, well, she was just a servant. He could claim that since the wood burned for a lowly Omega, it proved the wood was fine, and Seraphina just had bad luck with the wind. Either way, he could spin it. He needed the fire to burn. He didn't care who started it, as long as the ceremony concluded. "Pick up the torch," Kaelen ordered, his voice echoing with Alpha command. It was a heavy, psychic weight that forced lower-ranked wolves to obey. Elara's knees buckled slightly under the pressure, but she remained standing. "It is forbidden, Kaelen. Only the Luna can light the torch. If I touch it, I disrespect the pack laws." "I am the law!" Kaelen bellowed. "I am the Alpha, and I order you to light that fire. Prove to these people that you brought us good wood, or I will have you stripped of your skin right here on this altar." The cruelty of the threat hung in the air. Even Seraphina looked shocked for a moment. Elara looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw a man who would burn everything down to save his own ego. And in that moment, the last tether of loyalty she held for the Blackwood pack snapped. "As you wish, Alpha," Elara whispered. She walked up the steps past Kaelen. She approached Seraphina, who sneered and shoved the golden torch into Elara's chest. "Fix this, you filth!" Seraphina hissed. Elara took the torch. It was heavy, warm to the touch. She turned to the basin. The black smoke was still rising, thick and choking. Elara didn't use the flint. She didn't need to strike the torch. She simply closed her eyes and reached out, letting her hand hover over the wet wood. "They think I am nothing," she thought. "They think I am ash." Deep inside her, something ancient woke up. It wasn't just her wolf. It was something older. A bloodline that had been hidden, suppressed by medicines she had been force-fed in the orphanage, now clearing from her system. She opened her eyes. They weren't their usual hazel. They were glowing a violent, piercing violet. "Burn," Elara whispered. She didn't touch the wood with the torch. She didn't have to. The moment the word left her lips, the torch in her hand exploded with light. But it wasn't orange fire. A column of violet flame erupted from the torch, shooting 10 feet into the air. The force of the heat knocked Seraphina backward, sending her sprawling onto the stone floor. Elara lowered the torch to the wood. The wood didn't just catch fire, it sang, A roar like a jet engine filled the sanctuary. The black smoke vanished instantly, replaced by a dazzling, purifying violet inferno that swirled around Elara, consuming the wood but leaving her skin untouched. The fire danced. It didn't burn wildly, it moved with intelligence. It spiraled around Elara's body, caressing her arms, braiding itself into her hair like a crown of light. The crowd screamed. Some fell to their knees. Kaelen stood frozen, his mouth agape, shielding his eyes from the blinding brilliance. The fire wasn't silver, as the legend foretold for a regular lunar. It was violet, the color of the Alpha Supreme, the color of a queen. The flames rose higher, forming the shape of a massive, ethereal wolf head above Elara. The fire wolf opened its jaws and let out a silent howl that vibrated in the bones of every shifter in the room. Elara turned slowly to face the congregation. She was no longer the Omega scrubbing floors. She was a goddess of ash and flame. She looked at Kaelen, who was now trembling, his dominance completely shattered by the sheer power radiating from her. "You ordered me to light it, Alpha," Elara said, her voice amplified not by acoustics, but by the fire itself. "Are you satisfied?" The torch in her hand dissolved into dust, consumed by her power, but the fire in the basin raged on, bowing, literally bending physically downward towards Elara's feet. Silence gripped the hall. Total, terrified silence. Then a slow, rhythmic clapping began from the front row. Alpha Dominic stood up. He walked toward the altar, ignoring the heat that was keeping everyone else back. He stopped at the foot of the stairs, looking up at Elara with a mixture of awe and recognition. "Violet fire," Dominic said, his voice cutting through the silence. "The mark of the true sovereign, the phoenix wolf." He looked at Kaelen, his expression turning to ice. "You didn't reject a mate, Kaelen. You rejected a queen." Dominic turned back to Elara, and, in front of the entire Northern Alliance, slowly sank to one knee. "I have been looking for you," Dominic said softly. Kaelen snapped out of his trance. "Get away from her." He screamed, his jealousy flaring over his fear. "She is my Omega! She is property of the Blackwood Pack!" Kaelen shifted. His clothes ripped as he transformed into his brown wolf, lunging up the stairs with a snarl, intending to bite Elara into submission. He never made it. Elara didn't flinch. She simply flicked her hand. A lash of violet fire whipped out, striking Kaelen mid-air. He yelped, thrown backward across the sanctuary like a rag doll. He smashed into a stone pillar and slumped to the floor, unconscious and singed. Seraphina screamed, scrambling away on her hands and knees. Elara stood alone at the altar, the fire swirling around her, terrifying and magnificent. She looked at Dominic, then at the unconscious Kaelen. "I am no one's property," she declared. The sanctuary was in pandemonium. The air smelled of ozone and singed fur. The violet fire in the basin had finally died down to a low, pulsing hum, but the heat remained, heavy and oppressive. Elara stood by the altar, her chest heaving. The adrenaline that had fueled her magical outburst was fading, replaced by a sudden, terrifying exhaustion. She swayed, her vision blurring at the edges. "Steady!" A deep voice rumbled beside her. Alpha Dominic was there instantly, his arm wrapping around her waist to support her. Unlike Kaelen, whose touch had always felt possessive and draining, Dominic felt like a solid earth anchor. His scent, rain on dark stone and cedar, cleared the fog in her head. I didn't mean to hurt him," Elara stammered, looking at Kaelen's unconscious form sprawled against the pillar. "He attacked a sovereign," Dominic said, his voice loud enough for the trembling crowd to hear. "The fire defended its master. It is the law of the elements." "Seize them!" The shriek came from Seraphina. She had scrambled to her feet, her beautiful dress ruined, her face a mask of soot and hatred. She pointed at Dominic and Elara. "That witch attacked the Alpha. She ruined the ceremony. Guards! Kill her!" The Blackwood guards, about 20 of them, hesitated. They looked at the unconscious Kaelen, then at the glowing, violet-eyed woman who had just commanded fire, and finally at Alpha Dominic, whose reputation as the wolf-eater was known across the continent. "I wouldn't," Dominic warned, his eyes flashing a dangerous crimson. "This is Blackwood territory," Seraphina screamed, her voice cracking. "My father is Alpha Silas of the Iron Tooth Pack. If you don't arrest this Omega, I will have the Iron Tooth Army level this estate." Alpha Silas, a massive, scarred man with greying hair, stepped forward from the front row. He didn't look hysterical like his daughter. He looked calculating. He signaled to his own personal guards. "Secure the exits," Silas ordered calmly. "No one leaves until we understand what abomination just occurred." The heavy oak doors slammed shut. The appalled guests began to panic, whispering frantically. This was no longer a wedding. It was a hostage situation. Kaelen groaned, stirring on the floor. 2 healers rushed to him, helping him sit up. He shook his head, looking dazed, until his eyes focused on Elara, wrapped in Dominic's arms. The humiliation hit him harder than the fire. "Get your hands off her, Dominic," Kaelen rasped, staggering to his feet. He winced, clutching his ribs. "She is a member of the Blackwood Pack. She is under my jurisdiction. She will be tried for treason and witchcraft." "She is a phoenix wolf," Dominic countered, his voice cold steel. "She is the rarest kind of shifter in existence, a creature of the moon goddess directly. She falls under no pack's jurisdiction but her own. And as of this moment, I am declaring her under the protection of the Shadow River Alliance." "You have no right," Kaelen shouted, his insecurity bleeding into his anger. "She was scrubbing my floors this morning. She is a nobody, an orphan I took pity on." "An orphan?" Dominic laughed, a dark, dry sound. "Tell me, Kaelen, did you ever wonder why her eyes were hazel? Why she never shifted into a wolf until today? Why you felt a bond, but rejected it because she had no status?" Elara looked up at Dominic, confused. "What are you talking about?" Dominic looked down at her, his expression softening. "They drugged you, Elara, for years. Wolfsbane mixed with suppressants. It's why you were weak. It's why you couldn't shift. Someone in this pack knew what you were and wanted to keep you dormant. They wanted a servant, not a queen." The room went silent. "That's a lie," Kaelen spat. "We took her in when her parents died in a car crash." "Did they?" Dominic challenged. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded, yellowed document. "My spies have been digging into the Blackwood archives for months. I found the autopsy reports of the crash victims from 12 years ago. The bodies were found with claw marks, Kaelen, not glass shards. And the little girl found in the wreckage? Her blood tests showed off-the-charts latent energy. Someone buried those tests." Dominic turned his gaze slowly toward Alpha Silas, Seraphina's father. "Silas?" Dominic said softly. "You were the first on the scene of that accident, weren't you? It was your territory border." Silas's face remained impassive, but his scent spiked, acrid, sour fear. "I helped a tragedy. I brought the child to Blackwood. I saved her life." "You suppressed her because you knew," Dominic accused. "You knew that if a phoenix wolf rose, the old laws would reinstate the royal lineage, and your plan to consolidate power through Seraphina and Kaelen's marriage would be meaningless." Elara felt the room spinning. Her parents murdered. Her weakness manufactured. She looked at Kaelen. "Did you know?" she whispered. Kaelen looked genuinely confused. Elara, I didn't. I swear. It doesn't matter, Seraphina interrupted, marching forward. She pulled a silver dagger from her garter, a ceremonial blade, but sharp enough to kill. She is a threat to the stability of the region. Witchcraft is punishable by death. Seraphina lunged. It happened in slow motion. Kaelen reached out, shouting, "No!" But he was too far away. Dominic didn't move to block the knife. He didn't have to. Elara raised her hand instinctively. She didn't want to burn Seraphina. She just wanted her to stop. Freeze, Elara thought. The air in the room dropped 30 degrees in a second. Frost exploded outward from Elara's palm. It hit Seraphina mid-lunge, encasing her legs in thick, jagged ice. Seraphina screamed as she was frozen to the floor, the dagger clattering from her hand. "Ice!" someone whispered in the crowd. "Fire and ice? That's impossible." Dominic looked at Elara with intense pride. "The phoenix is not just fire, Elara. It is balance, destruction, and preservation." He turned to the room, his voice booming. "The wedding is over. The trial begins now." The trial took place in the Blackwood War Room, a dark chamber lined with maps and ancient weapons. It was a makeshift council. Kaelen sat at the head of the table, looking pale and diminished. Alpha Silas sat to his right, radiating quiet menace. Dominic sat on the left, with Elara beside him. The doors were guarded by a mix of Blackwood and Shadow River enforcers, an uneasy truce holding them back from tearing each other apart. Elara stared at her hands. The violet energy was still humming under her skin, but the exhaustion was bone deep. She felt like a weapon that had been fired and then left to smoke. "This is irregular," Silas grumbled, lighting a cigar. "We should execute the girl and be done with it. She is dangerous. You saw what she did to my daughter." "Your daughter tried to murder her," Dominic replied calmly, leaning back in his chair. "Elara acted in self-defense. And you are avoiding the subject, Silas. The blood tests." Dominic threw the folder onto the table. It slid across the mahogany surface and hit Kaelen's hand. Kaelen opened it. His eyes scanned the pages, widening with every line. This is signed by my father," Kaelen whispered. "The late Alpha. He authorized the suppressants." "Your father was a weak man," Silas sneered. "He feared power he couldn't control, just as you should." "Why?" Elara spoke up. Her voice was quiet, but it commanded the room. She looked at Silas. "Why kill my parents? Who were they?" Silas exhaled a cloud of smoke, looking at her with cold, dead eyes. "Your father was the Alpha of the Lunar Crown Pack, the Royals. They were arrogant. They thought they could dictate laws to the rest of us. They refused to open their diamond mines to trade. They needed to be removed. So you ambushed them." Dominic finished the story. "You and Kaelen's father. You slaughtered the Royal Alpha and his Luna. But you couldn't kill the child. The prophecy says that if the blood of the phoenix is spilled by a traitor, the land itself will die. So you kept her as a slave. You broke her spirit so she would never awaken." Kaelen looked sick. He stared at Elara, seeing her properly for the first time in years. The girl he had mocked, the girl he had forced to scrub his floors. She was royalty. She was the rightful ruler of them all. "I didn't know," Kaelen pleaded, looking at Elara. "Elara, you have to believe me. I thought you were just weak. I rejected you because I thought I had to protect the pack from a weak Luna." "You rejected me because you are a coward, Kaelen," Elara said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You valued power over the bond, and now you have neither." "Enough of this history lesson." Silas stood up, stubbing out his cigar. "The fact remains. She is one girl. We have armies. Dominic, you have one pack. If you try to walk out of here with her, The Iron Tooth Pack will declare war on Shadow River. We will burn your lands. Is she worth that? Dominic didn't hesitate. He stood up, towering over Silas. She is my mate. The declaration hung in the air like a thunderclap. Elara's head snapped up. Kaelen looked like he had been punched in the gut. Mate? Kaelen stammered. No, that's impossible. She is bonded to me. I rejected her, but the bond never fully snapped. Because you didn't reject her properly, Dominic said. You rejected Elara the Omega. You never rejected Elara the Phoenix. But the moment she awakened at the altar, the moon goddess corrected your mistake. She severed your tie and forged a new one. Dominic turned to Elara, extending his hand. His palm was warm, inviting. I felt it the moment I walked into the hall, Dominic said softly to her. The pull. I didn't want to frighten you, but I will burn this entire mountain range to the ground before I let them touch you again. Elara looked at his hand. Then she looked at Kaelen, the man she had loved, who was now just a pathetic figure caught in his father's sins. She placed her hand in Dominic's. A spark of electricity, pure and golden, zinged up her arm. It wasn't painful like the fire. It was healing. It felt like coming home. War it is, then, Silas snarled. He slammed his hand on the table. Guards! Kill them all. The windows of the war room shattered inward. But it wasn't the Iron Tooth guards attacking. Through the broken glass, massive grey wolves leaped into the room. They weren't ordinary shifters. They were huge, their fur matted with snow, their eyes glowing with wild intelligence. The rogues? Kaelen gasped, backing away. Not rogues, Elara said, her eyes beginning to glow violet again. She could hear their voices in her head. They weren't enemies. They were hers. The wolves circled the table, snarling at Silas and Kaelen, but lowering their heads when they looked at Elara. The Guardians of the Lunar Crown, Dominic said, a savage grin spreading across his face. They've been hiding in the mountains for 12 years, waiting for their queen to wake up. Looks like your army is outnumbered, Silas. Silas roared, shifting into a massive, scarred grey wolf. He lunged across the table, jaws snapping for Elara's throat. Dominic shifted midair, a gigantic black wolf, larger than any alpha in history. He collided with Silas, teeth sinking into the traitor's shoulder. They crashed into the wall, a ball of fur and fury. Kaelen stood frozen, looking at Elara. "Help me, Kaelen," Elara said, calmly. "Redeem yourself, or die a traitor like your father." Kaelen looked at Dominic, fighting Silas. He looked at Seraphina, who was dragging herself into the room with a gun in her hand. Seraphina raised the gun, aiming at Elara's back. "Die, bitch!" Seraphina screamed. Kaelen moved. For the first time in his life, he didn't calculate the cost. He just acted. He threw himself in front of Elara. Bang! The gunshot echoed through the castle. Kaelen crumpled to the floor, blood blooming on his chest. Elara screamed, spinning around. Her violet energy exploded outward, not as fire, but as pure force. It hit Seraphina, blasting her through the open doors and into the stone wall of the corridor. She didn't get up. Elara dropped to her knees beside Kaelen. He was gasping, pink froth bubbling on his lips. "Why?" Elara wept, pressing her hands to his wound. Her hands glowed, but the healing magic wouldn't knit the wound. It was a silver bullet. To light the fire," Kaelen whispered, blood running down his chin. He looked at her, his eyes dimming. The fire. It was always beautiful. He took one last ragged breath, and his hand fell limp. The Alpha of Blackwood was dead. Elara let out a wail of grief and rage that shook the foundations of the castle. The violet fire erupted from her skin, melting the war room table, scorching the stone. Dominic, having pinned Silas to the ground, looked up. He saw Elara transforming, not into a wolf. She was shifting into something else. Wings of pure violet flame sprouted from her back. The phoenix had fully risen, and it demanded justice. The silence that followed the gunshot was heavy, broken only by the ragged, wet gasps of the man lying on the floor. Elara dropped to her knees, skidding through the debris of the shattered window glass. She pressed her hands frantically against Kaelen's chest, trying to stem the flow of crimson that soaked his white, ceremonial shirt. "No, no, no!" she chanted, her voice trembling. "Don't you dare! You don't get to leave. You have to fix this." Kaelen looked up at her. His skin was already turning the color of ash, his lips stained red. He coughed, a terrible bubbling sound, and reached up with a shaking hand to touch her face. I broke it," he whispered, his eyes unfocused. "The bond. I broke it. But it's beautiful now." "Save your breath, Kaelen," Elara cried, tears streaming down her face. "I can heal you. I just need—" "You can't," he rasped, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "Silver bullet. Iron tooth poison. It's fitting." He took a jagged breath, his gaze locking onto hers with a clarity he hadn't possessed in years. "I was blind, Elara. I looked for a crown and missed the queen." His hand slipped from her cheek. His chest hitched once, then stilled. The light in his eyes, once filled with arrogance and then regret, faded into nothingness. Kaelen, the Alpha of Blackwood, was gone. For a heartbeat, the room was dead silent. Then Elara screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated devastation. It started low, a guttural sob, and rose into a piercing wail that shattered the remaining windows in the castle. And with the scream, the fire came. It didn't burst from her hands this time. It erupted from her very soul. A shock wave of violet plasma exploded outward, vaporizing the heavy oak conference table instantly. The stone walls of the war room began to hiss and bubble, turning to molten slag. Dominic, who had been pinning Silas to the ground, was thrown back by the sheer force of the heat. He scrambled to his feet, shielding his face with his arm. "Elara!" She didn't hear him. She stood up, but her feet didn't touch the floor. She hovered 3 feet in the air, suspended by gravity-defying power. From her shoulder blades, massive wings of violet flame unfurled, stretching 12 feet across, scorching the ceiling. Her hair floated around her head like a halo of white-hot light, and her eyes were no longer hazel or even violet. They were pure, blinding white. The phoenix had risen, and it was angry. Silas, the iron-tooth alpha, scrambled backward on his hands and knees, terror etching deep lines into his scarred face. He had faced armies. He had faced monsters. But he had never faced a deity. "Stay back!" Silas shrieked, his voice cracking. "I command you. I am an Alpha Supreme. I have the largest army in the north." Elara turned her head slowly. The movement was robotic, terrifying. When she spoke, her voice was layered, her own voice, overlaid with the echoes of 1,000 dead ancestors. "Your army is dust," Elara said. The sound vibrated in the teeth of everyone in the room. "Your title is dust. You are dust." "I'll give you anything," Silas begged, backing up until he hit the molten wall, singing the back of his expensive suit. "Money, land. I know where the rest of the royal vaults are hidden. I can make you richer than God." Elara drifted closer. The heat was so intense that the carpet beneath her evaporated before it could even catch fire. "You stole 12 years of my life," Elara stated, raising a hand. The violet flames swirled around her fingers, condensing into a sphere of oscillating energy. "You stole my mother's laugh. You stole my father's guidance. And just now, You stole the chance for a foolish boy to become a good man." Silas realized there was no bargaining. With a roar of desperation, he shifted. His bones cracked and reshaped as he forced himself into his massive grey wolf form. He launched himself at her, jaws snapping, hoping to tear out her throat before she could strike. It was a futile gesture. Elara didn't even flinch. She simply clenched her fist. In mid-air, Silas froze. An invisible grip of telekinetic force caught him, suspending the 1,000-pound wolf as if he were a toy. He whimpered, thrashing his legs against nothing. "Burn!" Elara whispered. She thrust her hand forward. The sphere of violet energy shot into Silas's chest. It wasn't a quick explosion. It was a slow, agonizing consumption. The violet fire ate through his fur, his skin, his darkness. Silas howled, a sound that would haunt the nightmares of the Blackwood Pack for generations, until his form dissolved completely, turning into shimmering silver ash that rained down onto the scorched floor. The villain was dead. But the fire didn't stop. Elara's grief was a bottomless well, and her power was pouring out of it uncontrolled. The castle shook violently. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling. Chunks of stone began to fall. The heat was becoming unlivable. The oxygen was being burned out of the room. "She's going to bring the mountain down," one of the guardians yelled from the doorway. "Run!" The guards and guests fled the corridor, terrified of the apocalypse unfolding in the war room. But Dominic didn't run. He looked at the woman floating in the center of the inferno. Her skin was glowing, cracking like porcelain under the pressure of the energy inside her. She was losing herself. If she didn't stop, she would burn herself out of existence. Dominic took a breath, shifted into his human form, stripping away his natural armor, and walked into the fire. The heat was unbearable. It blistered his skin immediately. His hair singed. Every step was agony. But he kept walking. "Elara!" he roared, fighting the wind of the flames. She looked down at him, her white eyes devoid of recognition. She raised a hand, preparing to strike him down as she had Silas. "Go back," the voices in her head commanded. "All who approach must burn." "Then burn me!" Dominic shouted, stepping directly under her hovering form. He reached up, grabbing her ankle. The contact sizzled. Smoke rose from his hand. He gritted his teeth against the screaming pain, refusing to let go. "I am not Silas," Dominic gritted out, looking up into her blinding face. "I am not Kaelen. I am not here to use you or worship you. I am here to love you." The white light in Elara's eyes flickered. A speck of hazel returned. "Dominic?" she whimpered, the multi-layered voice fracturing. "Come down," Dominic pleaded, his voice breaking with emotion. "The justice is done. The war is over. Don't let the fire take you from me. I just found you." He pulled her, not with strength, but with gravity. Elara looked at his hand, burned, scarred, but holding on tight. She felt his pain through the bond. He was hurting himself to anchor her to the earth. The rage drained out of her, replaced by a crushing exhaustion. The wings of fire sputtered and vanished. The blinding light faded. She fell. Dominic caught her before she hit the ground. He sank to his knees, wrapping his scorched arms around her, burying his face in her neck. "I've got you," he whispered, rocking her as the room finally began to cool. "I've got you." Elara clung to him, sobbing into his ruined shirt, finally just a girl again. 3 months later, the winter snow had melted, revealing the first green shoots of spring across the valley. The Blackwood estate had been rebuilt, the dark stone replaced with bright, white marble and glass. It was no longer a fortress of fear. It was a beacon. Elara stood on the grand balcony, the wind playing with the hem of her silk dress. She looked different now. There was a streak of permanent silver in her hair, a scar from the night the phoenix woke up, and her eyes held a wisdom that was centuries old. Behind her, the doors opened. Dominic walked out, carrying 2 mugs of tea. His hands were healed, though faint. Silvery scars remained on his palms, marks of honor he refused to hide. "The council meeting is starting," Dominic said, handing her a mug. "The representatives from the Iron Tooth Pack have arrived. They are terrified you're going to turn them into ash." Elara took a sip, a small, mischievous smile playing on her lips. "Let them be a little terrified. It keeps them honest." Dominic chuckled, wrapping his arm around her waist and pulling her close. "And Seraphina?" "Still in the northern wastes," Elara said, her expression hardening slightly. "Living in a rogue camp, without servants, without money, scrubbing her own clothes in freezing river water. I hear she's become quite the expert at cleaning. It seemed poetic." "You are a cruel queen," Dominic teased, kissing her temple. "I am a fair queen," Elara corrected. She turned in his arms, looking out over the courtyard. Below them, a statue had been erected in the center of the garden. It was Kaelen, immortalized in stone, standing guard over the pack he had died to save. Fresh white lilies lay at the base of the pedestal. Elara rested her head on Dominic's chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. "They said I was born to serve," Elara whispered, watching the sun crest over the mountains. Dominic squeezed her hand, the bond between them humming, warm, golden, and unbreakable. "You were," Dominic replied softly. "You just weren't born to serve tea. You were born to serve justice." Elara smiled, the violet fire in her eyes sparking one last time, warm and controlled. "Ready to go in?" she asked. "After you, my Luna," Dominic said, opening the door. Elara stepped through, head held high, walking out of the shadows and into the light that belonged to her. And that is the story of Elara, the Omega who set the world on fire. From the ashes of betrayal, she rose to reclaim not just her title but her soul. Kaelen's sacrifice proves that it is never too late to do the right thing, even if it costs you everything. And Silas learned the hard way that you can only push a person so far before they stop breaking and start burning. This story reminds us that true strength isn't about how loud you can roar, but about standing your ground when the whole world tries to make you kneel. Elara and Dominic showed us that love isn't about possession. It's about being the anchor that keeps you safe when the storm hits. If this finale gave you chills, please smash that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Seraphina's punishment in the wastes was enough? Or should Elara have finished her off like Silas? Let's debate it below. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I have a new story coming next week about a rejected mate who returns as the CEO of her ex's company, and you do not want to miss the drama. Thanks for watching, and stay wild.